Sensitive content warning.
Every parent wants to believe, not my child, not in my home, not on my watch. But today's predators don't lurk in dark alleys. They show up in DMs, gaming chats, live streams, and even AI platforms. They're patient, they're strategic, and they're targeting kids right where they feel the safest, behind a screen. Today, we're sitting down with forensic specialist Art Schmeiser, who works on the front lines of online exploitation to uncover what's really happening, what parents are missing, and most importantly, how we can protect our kids without living in fear. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the American Classroom podcast, where we discuss the role of education in building a civil society. I'm Jared Taylor, and I'm here with my host, Lindsay Crosling, for a special podcast edition with Art Schmeiser on keeping our children safe online. How are you doing this morning, Lindsay?
Doing good. I'm excited to talk about this really important topic.
Yeah, that's great. And we have Art online, and so excited to learn from him on, yes, this is an important topic. Safety of our children is number one. Art, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Good. This is great. Well, for our listeners, we would just like to have you start by telling a little bit about how you got into this space of child safety and online and law enforcement, things like that. How about a little bit of your backstory?
Really, it goes back years upon years. I remember being a young kid and just um, any media or hearing my parents talking about, you know, anything that was going on in the world where a child was maybe abducted or maybe exploited. And I remember it hit just so close to my core, but I never imagined I'd actually make a career out of combating that type of offense. Looking back now, I kind of laugh because I realized that I was kind of being set up from a very young age to go into that line of work. So, uh, following a following a mission for my church, I ended up going and deciding to join law enforcement. And after about 7, 8 years in patrol, I ended up going and working for the Arizona Attorney General's office. And I was asked to create the child exploitation unit within the Arizona Attorney General's office. And at that time, we partnered with the Federal Bureau of Investigations, or FBI, and we were housed out of the FBI and were part of the Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force. So during that point in time, I ended up having to essentially learn the ins and outs of how to investigate those types of crimes, how to partner with state, local, and federal agencies, and how to essentially um, push all those cases to prosecution and get successful prosecution. So to say it was somewhat of a learning curve, the Arizona Attorney General's office had never had that type of unit, and it actually turned into a full-blown unit within that office.
Well, too bad, right? I mean, it's sad that we have to have that level of resources in our community, but it's a reality, and that's why we're having it on this episode, is because parents, teachers, educators, school leaders, they really need to know from people like you, what's going on and what are the traps, what are the misconceptions. That's what we want to dig into today, to help people really become tuned in on what's going on here, because I think the landscaping, this issue may be changing quickly as well. So,
yeah, and you're joining us from Texas.
That's correct. So I left law enforcement or retired from law enforcement several years ago, and now I'm private sector, but still have a passion towards protecting children. I'm the father of 6 children, and um, it's this has become a pandemic within our society, unfortunately, and our children are definitely at the root or the definitely being targeted by individuals that wish harm upon our children in the community.
Well, Jared and I, he has a family, I have a family. We are worried about our kids who are online. We work in education, so obviously the schools that we work with, a lot of parents, a lot of teachers who could use this information. So we're excited to dive in here and maybe tackle some misconceptions parents have about what online predators look like and don't look like, and kind of how to keep our kids safe without feeling scared. I feel like as a parent, there's a lot of fear around just letting my kids be online, even though I have parental control set up. So
Let's start with our young people. What are some of the common traps you're seeing that our children are falling into? These traps that are being laid by these evil people trying to exploit them. Maybe just what are the top 3 or 4 that you're seeing right now?
What generally takes place is there's what's called a grooming phase, and a grooming phase can take place in many different um, forms. It can be done through maybe monetary gifts, providing a false reality to the individual. So, for instance, if a girl meets somebody, she might be getting the designer purses, or she might be getting money, or might be getting just a lifestyle that she might not be used to. Um, in many instances, some of the individuals that might be getting pushed or groomed might come from a upbringing where there isn't a whole lot of parental control. There might be some disconnect with that parent where there is parental control, but there might be just a little bit. Um, there's a disconnect in terms of love and compassion between the mother and daughter, the father and son. So that creates an environment where somebody might be able to exploit that child by providing them a false reality or a false lifestyle that fills a void that that child feels that they have in their life. Now, having said that, that reality, that false reality, quickly comes crashing down upon the conclusion of that grooming phase. So, for instance, once that individual is connected to the adult enough, the gifts stop, the romance might stop, and many of the luxuries that that child has become gravitated to or feels they have in their life will abruptly come to a halt. So that is really the grooming phase that takes place with a lot of our kids by child predators. Um, they show a they show care, they show empathy. Now, it's not real empathy, it's not real care, but it is a false um, presentation of empathy, love, and care.
Yeah, that's interesting. Something that they may not feel that they're getting at home, so they find somewhere else to, feel the love or connection that they're looking for in their life. But
Yes, and that's not to say that the parents aren't providing that. As as the father of six kids, we've had that argument with our kids before, like, oh, you don't care about us. I mean, it's anybody who has a teenage child is going to be having that conversation. I would encourage parents, though, if that's the conversation taking place in the home, it's easy to brush that off, but I would encourage not doing so. If the child feels that they have a void in their life, I would definitely take that as a very serious concern. Even I would err on the side of caution with that way more than just brushing it off as this is normal behavior for a 16-year-old, 17-year-old. Because again, if they're not finding the love within the home that they feel they need, they may turn to outside influences. And that's something that we as parents can't control. And that's terrifying.
To go back to the grooming kind of steps that you talked about, I remember our local chamber had invited someone from, there's an organization in Arizona, Arizonans Against Pornography. I can't remember the exact acronym, but they had kind of talked about there's like a connection made online, and it's, typically a false identity. And then they make that connection, like you said, they're enamored, or they're complimenting them, or there's some sort of romance or close friendship evolving. And then the gifts come. And then do I remember, is there a point where then they say, well, the gifts stop, but like, I've given you these gifts, now you owe me. There's some sort of like request for engagement and a favor the other direction. Am I understanding?
Correct. It can definitely turn into that. That is definitely a trend that we see. Um, in many cases, if all those don't work, it could also turn into just threats, intimidation. In many cases, when we would work these types of cases, the offender would be seeking out information. So they would be seeking out, hey, do you have family members? Do you have uh, do you have siblings? All types of leverage they can use down the road to obtain what they really want to obtain. Um, what is your relationship like with your siblings? Because if the victim or the survivor, as we generally refer to victims of child sex trafficking, if the survivor has a really good relationship with their siblings and they love their siblings, that's an area for the offender to target because, hey, they might make threats or intimidation of, hey, if you don't want your siblings to be hurt, then you're gonna abide by what I tell you.
That's really scary. Do you have some warning signs, like as a parent watching your child? I know you mentioned, like, if they're saying, you don't care about me, or you only care about my siblings, or they share that they feel some unfairness or some distance from the parent. So you said that is something to definitely, um, you know, help be aware of. And then what are some other warning signs that parents could watch for if their child is secretly participating online with someone like this, and they're not aware?
One of the things that we do as parents in my home is that we trust but verify. So you want to essentially allow your kid to have that leniency, right? You want to allow them to branch out and be their own person because they need to feel trusted. However, with the world we live in, there are dangers around every corner for these individuals and for these kids. So in terms of what we do with our teenagers is you can have a phone, but when I can't even talk to you without you holding onto your phone, I start getting concerned. If I say, "Hey, hand me your phone, I want to see what's on it," and they even flinch, I start getting concerned because it becomes what is on that phone that you're worried about. Um, and so what I would caution parents and what I would suggest to parents is that if they provide their kid a phone, that they have control over it to the point that if they tell the child, hand me your phone, and that child flinches, I would be very concerned. I would be very concerned because there's something that's causing for the child to be enamored with that phone. There's either a conversation, a relationship, maybe pictures that they're taking to send to somebody. And that would be very concerning. Outside of that, if I started seeing my child showing up with, say, cash or currency that is in excess of what they should have, or um, new clothing and handbags or anything that they can't account for. Uh, for instance, my child doesn't have a job. However, they keep coming home with several $1,000s worth of new stuff. I would start taking that as a sign and a very that would be concerning. Additionally, if they start detaching from the family, and again, that's a little bit of a difficult thing to see, given the fact that as kids get into their teenage phase, they do somewhat branch out on their own. I don't necessarily think every child says, "Hey, I don't want anything to do with my family." However, it is normal behavior for a child to kind of branch out and kind of go their own way and want their independence. But there's a difference between independence and there's a difference with them secluding themselves and separating themselves from the family. And so I would be very cautious and aware of that type of behavior.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. And of course, we have this new Wild West world of artificial intelligence and all the versions of that. How have you seen that um, that influence either help or exacerbate some of the problems here that we're talking about?
Absolutely. So AI has changed the entire landscape of everything, right? When we go online now, we can look at AI, and it's really difficult to tell whether a photo or a video is real or fake. And so, what, and this is maybe pivoting a little bit away from child sex trafficking and child exploitation, but what's starting to happen in many cases is AI is being used maybe for cyberbullying or for creating content that isn't actually true or accurate. And so it really creates another layer of concern for us as parents with our children. Now, all of a sudden, somebody's posting inaccurate or an AI generated photo of our child. And all of a sudden, our child's feeling that feeling embarrassed. They're feeling like, how can I ever go back to school? Everybody's looking at this photo and thinks it's true or accurate. And it really creates an environment where now we have to worry about, is our child going to self harm themselves because there's an embarrassing photo out there? And so we did notice when AI came into play that somebody would create an inaccurate or a AI generated photo of somebody, blast it across to in text messages, and now all of a sudden we're having discussions with children about their own safety and their desire to continue living, and explaining to them that a photo isn't worth taking your own life. And it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying as a father and as a community member to have to worry about, is somebody going to make just a completely horrible mistake by taking their life over an AI generated photo. And our hope is that children can see that what seems to be a huge mountain today or seems to matter today, nobody's going to remember uh, down the road. And we all will grow up and have beautiful lives, and these children will rebound from somebody creating some horrible image with AI.
Yeah, and the law's a little slow to respond. You know, I know some state legislatures are passing laws, and some have already been passed. I think from a school standpoint, school leaders need to know what's going on and just get ahead of it. Make sure that they talk to their schools, whether it's announcements or in whatever class they have, to just let people know this isn't appropriate, and there are going to be severe punishments, and then they actually need to follow through with them as well, not just talk. They actually need to enforce their policies that they have, should they have policies for this type of abuse. That's really what it is, and it should be treated as abuse and harm, just like they already do on in their school handbooks and policies.
When I was growing up and going to school, bullying, you had to actually go face to face with someone. You had to actually make the comments to them. Now, you can go in a forum or send out a text message. You don't have to have any interaction. You don't have to have any anxiety of how the response is going to be. You can just spout off, uh, say a text message or create an AI generated photo and send it to whoever. And if the fallback happens, these kids can just start blocking everybody, and they don't have to deal with the consequences outside of what you're saying with school administrators and so on and so forth. But in terms of the natural consequences that would have occurred or could potentially have occurred if you had to do it face to face, nowadays it creates an environment where children can say and do some very nasty things to other children. And there's really no risk or no concern of, well, if this doesn't work out, they just can move on very quickly. And that's terrifying. Uh, and I feel so bad for our children that have to go through that.
Yeah, it's terrible. There's a lot of schools that are closing down or wondering why enrollment is dropping. Well, this is one of the reasons, not the whole reason, but one of them is their children don't feel safe in the schools because whether it's this or other issues, maybe drugs or weapons on campus. But school safety is number one, and school leaders should be on it and enforce it. And don't be afraid, oh, I'm going to lose enrollment if I am hard on this or enforcing this strictly. You're actually going to increase enrollment because your school is going to be safe. It's going to be more welcoming for more families.
Well, and I think parents appreciate when the school is teaching about interacting online in a respectful way, not bullying. So, because if the parent's teaching that at home and then the school is reinforcing that, or if it's not happening in one of those places, someone should be reminding children that if you're going to interact online, that you need to be kind and respectful, and there's consequences if you're not. And then I like what you said earlier about, you were talking about a physical monitoring of, trust and report, or what did you call it?
Trust and verify.
Yeah. So, setting up the expectation, maybe if you have a phone that your child's going to use, say, okay, here are the rules around it. At any point, I can collect your phone, or maybe that hasn't been a rule, but now you're learning that would be a helpful thing to do, have that conversation with your child. Like, it's my job to make sure that you're being safe online, that you're spoken to respectfully, and that you're doing that in return. So I'm going to, take your phone whenever, and expect that it's going to be given to me, and then I can just verify what's on it is good and clean. I think monitoring, there's monitoring software, there's monitoring. I don't know if maybe you can share some links or resources that we can post with this episode for our families and educators who are watching or listening. I know I use a Gryphon router at home. There's different, hardware that you can have in your home. I know that schools typically set up, safe internet for the students who are at school. But I think the lack of monitoring first could introduce children to harmful content, monitoring maybe even if they're on Roblox or a game like that, right? You want to make sure that they're only friending people who they actually know in person. They don't chat. I mean, what are some of these things? It seems like there's too many things to list.
There really are too many things to list, and that's the scary part, right? Is that if it's an online forum, if it's an online interaction, it's going to be an attraction for child exploitation. Um, if it creates an environment where somebody has the opportunity to communicate with a child, it's a potential for child exploitation. So you're right. If we're allowing our children unsupervised access to Roblox or to any type of online gaming environment, there is that potential. One of the things I would suggest is that, and something we deploy, is we don't allow devices in bedrooms. We require for all physical devices to be kept in a common area. And this goes back even to my child exploitation investigation days with the FBI. The FBI, how they have it set up, is that they have a room for all the investigators, and all the computers face towards each other, and everybody sits in one room. It's not that the FBI doesn't trust their investigators. It's not that the FBI doesn't trust that we're there for the right reasons, but they understand the harmful nature and effects of child exploitation, and they want to identify if somebody's positioned themselves to get into a unit that allows them access to that type of material. Or if they become somewhat addicted, they don't want to create a good environment or an easy environment for somebody to get addicted to something. So if you have, say, a child exploitation unit and this person just goes in a room by themselves, you're creating an environment where it's very comfortable for the individual. So to use the FBI's model, we need to create an environment where our children don't feel comfortable with accessing illicit material because they know that their family's walking around. They know that their mom and dad are right there. But if they're in their room by themselves with the opportunity and the vehicle to access this any type of illicit material or environment, it really becomes we're fostering an environment at that point for them to fall into some of these traps.
That's huge. I appreciate that comment. It reminds me of some excellent work. I think it's Dr. Angela Duckworth. I think she teaches out of University of Pennsylvania. She's coined a phrase called situational modification, and she had this really great graduation talk where she had everybody give their phone to the person to their left or right or something like that, and she made some really interesting observations. Her punchline was physically move devices or environments, kind of like what you said. And we'll put a link to some of her content in the show notes. I think it reinforces from an empirical standpoint what you're talking about. Another thing I talked about is, or I thought about when you're commenting that is, while we love online and there's lots to do, and I hope it never goes away, right? Being outside, playing basketball, playing soccer, getting outside the digital world a little bit more. Touch grass is a phrase people like to say, but get outside that whole situational modification. Remember what the real world is like. and it's a beautiful world, and it's full of wonderful things. It certainly has its own risks and dangers, but there's so much self-confidence and self-worth that can be learned on a basketball court or a soccer field or in an art class or other things outside of just the four corners of your your phone screen or your computer screen.
What I would say is that we have spent a little bit of time negatively talking about, like, well, trust but verify, anticipating that we're going to find something on our child's phone. However, if we're engaging in these types of activities and we're keeping our kids busy, and then all of a sudden we don't find something on their phone, alternatively, we should be expressing our gratitude to our child. We should be making that a big deal that they have abstained from something that a very large percentage of their peers have engaged in. And so, when I trust but verify with my children, when I come up empty-handed, um, I like to explain to them, "Hey, I'm really proud of you for abstaining from something that is just filling their world. It's inundating their world." Um, Funny enough, after law enforcement, or well, during law enforcement, and then after I went into computer forensics. So unfortunately, I do hold a little bit of a heavier weight with our children because I tell them I'm just going to extract all the data out of their phone. And usually I can get to the bottom of, if they've seen something or if they've stumbled upon something or accessed something. However, again, when I don't find anything, even if I found something before, I like to explain to them, "Hey, I'm really proud of you for not looking at this again, or not accessing this. I think you're going to be happier in life." And you just you re-engage with them, and um you reaffirm that what they're doing is right. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative. It can really be a positive interaction with the child.
I love that. I love the reminder to reinforce the positive behavior. The phrase "water the flowers, not the weeds." That's how we, reinforce positive behavior in our kids. Also remind ourselves how amazing our kids are and the positive choices they're making. And also, I think keeping that close relationship, I think that's the biggest thing that we can do. We're not going to notice if they're withdrawing if we don't have a close relationship with them in the first place. And if there's not open communication and trust, then they're not going to come tell us if all of a sudden someone's posted an inappropriate picture of them and they're just like panicked and don't know what to do, right? And they're buried in their thoughts and, negativity around it. And so having the best relationship we can with our kids, they can talk to us about it, I feel like is super important. And then it's something I thought of, if they're outside shooting hoops and they say like, watch me, kids like the attention from their parents. I think similarly, if they're playing Minecraft or they're online, they like us to be like, oh, what are you doing? Show me what you're building. And I think at least, whether it's an art app or something they're doing online or it's homework or if they're outside playing, the more we're interested in what they're doing, all of a sudden, if they don't let us see what they're doing or we don't let us participate, I feel like maybe that could also be a warning sign. But yeah, I think just having like the best, most open communication with our kids possible, then they might feel more comfortable coming to us when something happens that they're really not sure how to handle. Because they're just little. They don't know. Like, we're adults and we don't always know how to handle situations as they come up. And so we can't expect them to know how to handle these big, scary topics.
100%. The emotions that are provoked with the type of content they're faced with can create guilt. It can create shame. It can create all sorts of emotions that they just at their ages don't understand how to control. And it can cause embarrassment. And Mom, Dad, I saw this. I was approached by our 9-year-old the other day, and said that she saw somebody on a movie kissing, and she was so embarrassed to have to tell us. And at first, I made the pivotal mistake of kind of brushing it off, and then I thought, you know what? This is a great example to sit back and say, well, okay, let me talk through that with her, because clearly it sparked something in her where she felt she needed to tell me. So I wanted to create that open line of communication instead of discredit it and just shut it down. And so my wife and I, we spoke with her, and after we, had a conversation, just me and my wife, and it's cute that it's that innocent. But again, the bottom line is that she felt comfortable enough to bring it to her parents and talk about, hey, I saw this. Oh my goodness. And so I really think if we start at a young age, 9 years old, and keep that going, hopefully our children continue to feel comfortable sharing what's really going on in their lives.
I love that. I've heard responding with the phrase, I'm so glad you told me that.
Yes.
I'm so glad you're sharing this with me. How'd that make you feel? And starting with that. And that kind of gives us a chance to either like maybe hold in a laugh if we think it's silly, or hold in a yell if we're like, you saw what?
Yes.
It's just like, I'm so glad you're telling me this. How did that make you feel? And then we can kind of process like listening how they feel about what they saw, and then giving ourselves a minute to respond or be like, yeah, let's talk about that later. Maybe when we have a time, some time alone or whatever. So
Yes, it's so difficult to keep the reaction and the emotion the same, but if we as parents can keep that reaction the same each time, just loving, cool, calm, and collected, then our kids know what to expect. They show up thinking, okay, if I share some really hard stuff with my parents, they're gonna still respond with love, not what the. And so if we can really create that environment where they know what to expect and we know the type of reaction we're going to give them, it really can be beneficial for both sides.
Be the adult in the room. That's what we're here to do as parents or teachers or school leaders. We're the adults in the room, right? Young people are still just learning. They're still just figuring it out. There was there's a famous philosopher named Will Durant, and he wrote this huge volume, like 12, 13 volumes on the history of the world. history of civilization, I think is what he calls it. And he was talking about the youth and the emotions of sexuality and youth, and he called it a river of fire that must be banked and cooled with 100 restraints. And I thought, that's a really good way to look at it, because you touched on that. They're just learning some of these emotions, and they just and as adults, whether we're parents or teachers or school leaders, right? We have to pull those 100 restraints so that they can understand how to grow up and learn and understand what's going on in their own biology, and then they can become contributing, well-formed adults in the civil society. And that's part of what schools need to be doing, right? And we're the restraints, and be the adult in the room. And
I think
great.
sometimes it is not hard to be the adult in the room, but I think it's hard times if you're hearing all these stories of sextortion and these things happening, and then you see an interaction on a phone, or someone sent your child a picture. It's hard to not catastrophize, like, oh my gosh, this means XYZ. And I think sometimes it really does take some self-governance to be like, okay, I'm really glad you're sharing this with me. I'm glad I saw this, so we can talk about it. And then, spend some time thinking about it, and then talk to your child about it. But I know that I've had reactions to things I've heard, or things that I've happened in the family. And it, sometimes it's scary to think about, nothing actually happened or was sent, but just the catastrophizing, I feel like, because there's so much fear around what could be happening online, that I think it is hard.
And you could take traumatic experiences, and through the right questions or reflections, use those as raw materials, convert those to be great learning experiences, great opportunities for growth and development. And so they'll look back and say, yeah, I'm human, and part of humanity is making mistakes, but also figuring out, okay, here's what I actually learned from it, good and bad, and I don't want to do that again. So I'm going to put these guardrails in place, and we're going to move forward on it. And I think psychologically that just helps our young people understand, I'm not going to let this traumatic experience hold me hostage for the rest of my life. I'm actually going to use it as one of the best learning opportunities I've ever had in my formative years. It's going to form the character that I need to help other people eventually. And hopefully teachers and parents, principals, school leaders can see these are going to happen. It's a reality we're living with. How can we be that catalyst for it to be a formative for the positive, a learning experience? And hopefully people can get some ideas from this episode and others in their community on how to help this. It's not going away, but we can certainly grow from it.
Absolutely. It's really a pandemic and a war against our children. And uh, the best defense is being able to have that relationship with the child, and really discussing where do we go from here, because they will get exposed. They will get exposed in some way, shape, or form. That's not the question. The question is, how are they going to respond when somebody shows them a video, or shows them something, or texts them something? How are they going to respond to that attack? And if they haven't had that discussion ahead of time, it's going to be very difficult for them to wage off that attack.
Are you able to share an example of maybe a situation where it didn't turn out well and a parent could have prevented something bad from happening? And do you have an example of something that was stopped before anything bad happened?
We would receive a lot of cyber tips from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. When I left our child exploitation unit, I had 140 open active investigations. And so when I ended up leaving, before I left, one of the matters we had was two teenage boys who were on a video game, and they were approached by a gentleman an adult, and there became somewhat of it started out as a joke, and they started exposing themselves sexually to the gentleman, and the gentleman engaged in a lot of grooming. Well, through this investigation, the boys were asked by this adult male to go outside and take a picture of themselves. Well, unbeknownst to the boys, because they're young boys not paying any attention and thinking that they're just playing around and messing around with somebody online, they took a photo of their house, and in the background, they actually had the placard of the numerics of the home. And luckily, we were able to intervene, and we were able to investigate that and make an arrest before anything took place. But think how scary that is from a parental side of things, is that a harmless photo of a house became extremely harmful because all that individual had to do is check home addresses with those numerics, and he would have found exactly where they lived. Um, and so that was an absolute terrifying case to work, given the fact that, again, our children, when they're taking photos and sending them, sometimes they might not think that those are harmful photos. However, they might be giving up a lot of information. If they're texting photos, they might have their geo coordinates attached to that photo, where that person could end up pulling that. So that leads into the next is we did a lot of house operations where we would actually rent a home, or we would have a home, and we would wire it with mics, and we would create opportunities for individuals looking for a sexual interaction with a child to engage in chats with law enforcement. We were overwhelmed with how many people would actually show up. We were overwhelmed with the amount of interest in children. The first operation we did was a 2-week operation, and we closed with 35 arrests. By the time we were done, we actually went down to a 1-week operation, and it was not abnormal for us to end up closing out with 60 or more arrests. That is in our community. That is right here at our door, banging our door down. In one case, we engaged in a chat with an individual who wanted to come pick up 2 underage females for the purpose of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. His criminal history was he had an extensive criminal history. He was tied to a criminal street gang. He, he, he had been arrested for, I think he was actually out on parole for something else. And anyway, we were able to apprehend him before he actually met with those children. But here's my point with sharing that, is that if every time if somebody went out to go buy drugs, they were arrested, we probably wouldn't have a lot of people going out making undercover deals with cops, because they'd know, well, I'm just going to get arrested. If every time somebody went out to go meet a child or to sexually exploit a child, it was an undercover cop, we would not be clearing 60 arrests every single operation. So that was the light bulb that went off with me, was that, man, we are having operation after operation, and we are pulling in 60 arrests here, 60 arrests there. It didn't matter whether there was, in one investigation, we had a talk show host bring up that he knew that there were operations like this going the day our operation was supposed to start. We thought that that would essentially impact negatively our operation, and nobody would show up to our operation. It did not hinder our operation at all. And again, we ended up closing with about 60 arrests. So individuals with a sexual interest in children do not care what type of risk they're taking. Most things don't deter them. their sexual interest in the kid is going to outweigh anything else that might stand in their way of getting access to that child. And so, not to terrify community members, not to terrify parents, but unfortunately, this is the world we live in, and it's something we really need to pay attention to. It's something that needs to be on the forefront of our mind, and we really need to take it serious.
I appreciate you sharing those. Thank you.
Yeah, we're recording this in February of 2026, and in the news media, there's all kinds of chatter about a character named Jeffrey Epstein and what he's doing. And, it made me think as you're going through those case studies, who are the Jeffrey Epsteins in my community, right? I mean, it's not just about Hollywood and famous people, right? But it's a sad reality that we have to live in, and we need to be aware of it. And that's why we're doing this episode. That's why people need to be aware and understand that what their resources are.
Education can be prevention.
It's the best prevention.
Absolutely. It doesn't, unfortunately, this doesn't discriminate towards anybody. Having a sexual interest into something doesn't discriminate whether somebody's in the military or a police officer or a firefighter or a teacher. Um, it doesn't matter what their profession is. And I think sometimes we as parents say, well, this person's just, they're a police officer. It doesn't discriminate towards a certain profession, or it doesn't. This is something that's unfortunately an addiction that certain individuals have, whether they engaged in it willingly or whether they just have a sexual interest because that's their makeups. There are so many things that might play into it. But I think as a community and as parents, we need to get out of that mindset of, oh, it can't happen because this person's, we've known them forever, or, oh, that's just our best friends. I really would encourage the community just to really step up, and for parents to step up and just take a little bit of a closer look when it comes to protecting the child, and just keeping a little bit of a more watchful eye for each of the children, because it can happen to anybody. It can happen to when you least expect it.
Art, thank you. It's a heavy topic. We've covered some heavy material, but it's worth it. Our young people are worth it. Their futures are worth it. And so we hope that people will take this, think about the risks in their own family, in their own social circles. We hope school leaders will not ignore this. It's a reality in our schools. It's a sad reality. And they have resources with their local law enforcement and their county attorney's office. So we'd encourage everyone, to learn more, be aware, do a little risk analysis, and definitely, I love your point about show love in the home and the effect that can have, and show love and appreciation at school, and just do those things that help the inner child develop. Maybe some resistance to some of these exploitations in some ways, but I sure appreciate it. Anything you want to leave with our listeners as we just wrap up this episode?
No, I really appreciate you having me on. This has been a passion of mine, combating these types of crimes. I truly hope that one day we can live in a world without child exploitation, human trafficking. I think it's easy for people, especially when it comes to human trafficking, to think that those individuals chose to be part of that lifestyle. But these are not willing participants, especially when they're children. They are not willing participants. But when somebody sees an adult who's engaged in sex trafficking, it is just that. It's them actually being trafficked and them not having an opportunity to leave. And so I think as the community comes together and understands that this is not a willing participation, and that it starts on it starts many times with our children. I think the community can make a real impact. And like you said, we have a lot of great local and federal partnerships. I shared that I worked with the Arizona Attorney General's office, and they are constantly doing presentations to the community on human trafficking, and they're more than happy to come out to presentations and present to bodies of people for human trafficking and provide more information if that's wanted and needed.
That's great. And maybe we'll get some resources, both local and national to share with people that listen to this. So
Yeah, we can put it in the show notes.
Absolutely.
well, with that, thank you, Art. Sure appreciate your time today on this very important issue, and thank you again.
Absolutely. Anytime.
If you like this episode, please like and share with someone who would find this interesting. We appreciate you listening to the American Classroom podcast today.
Thank you.
American Classroom is brought to you by Heritage Academy Mesa. Heritage Academy in Mesa, Arizona is a public charter school serving grades 7 through 12. Youth that come to Heritage are not just students, but scholars who are taught by the #1 rated faculty in Arizona. If you'd like to learn more about Heritage Academy Mesa, please visit heritageacademyaz.com and click Mesa.